Welcome back to the Rother Valley Railway. I'm Trevor Streeter. Like any growing business, we have to consider the effects of our activities on the environment and our neighbours. As we said in our last video, we are sure that there's going to be economic benefits for many. Although we understand that our neighbours have expressed concerns, and in this video we would like to address some of those. One concern that has been raised is, what about the wildlife here in the Rother Valley? Won't that be affected by a railway coming through here? The railway has commissioned the Temple Group to act as consultants for environmental matters. Giles Coe, ecologist, gives his opinion about what happens when this becomes this.
My name's Giles Coe. I'm a technical director with the Ecology Consultancy. I've been working in commercial consultancy for around 15 years. Our sister company Temple are an environmental discipline and led the writing of the environmental statement, and we were employed as ecologists to assist with that process.
And what has that entailed?
The role of an ecological consultant is to work with our client throughout the design life of a project. So that will often entail being the first person on the site to carry out baseline surveys and to gather information from which we would later devise an environmental statement. Initially what we're looking for is what animals or plants may be present. We then make an assessment as to the likely impact of the proposals on those plants and animals. The basic principles that we follow, both here and in any other development or construction scenario, is we follow the mitigation hierarchy, which goes avoid, mitigate, compensate and enhance. So we do what we can to avoid impact by redesigning if necessary. Where redesign is not possible, then we implement mitigation measures. Where those mitigation measures are insufficient to retain the wildlife as we would like it, we would institute compensation measures to replace any habitats that might have been lost or disturbed during the process. And the final stage, of course, is to enhance. So what we want to see is when we walk away from a construction project that we've enhanced the local environment above the baseline that we found when we arrived.
What's your observation of wildlife in a railway environment?
Railways are a fantastic haven for wildlife, whether they're running or defunct, really. Because they're relatively undisturbed, it's just trains that are going through. So, for instance, on the track where we are now, it's very quiet. There's not a lot going on. Even on the West Coast Main Line, when the trains aren't running through, the environment around that remains undisturbed. So the vegetated embankments, even the ballast below our feet actually acts as a refuge and a habitat for some types of wildlife.
Oh, interesting. What are the comparisons between a high-speed line and a branch line like this?
Well, I think you've just said it. A high-speed line is a high-speed line. Trains running over 100 miles an hour. We're just simply not expecting that here. So trains will move at 25 miles an hour. Prior to my life as an ecologist, I worked in the rail industry, so I was well used to seeing things from the other side. And there you do get wildlife fatalities in high-speed train situations. Badgers or larger mammals can be struck by trains as they go past. But on a line such as this, at 25 miles an hour, everything's got time to get out of the way. There is also daytime running here rather than nighttime running. Badgers, as we know, are nocturnal animals, or they might come out in the early evening, but there simply won't be the trains running at that time. Railways are a fantastic environment for wildlife in a number of ways. One of the things that they do, being as a linear route cutting through the countryside, is to provide a corridor of movement for a large number of different animal and even plant species. For a line that has been out of use and has become overgrown, that remains the case that it will be used. It's a green corridor through. In reinstating the line, there will be inevitable impact by removing a proportion of the habitats within it. However, that will not alter or significantly impact the ability of animals to move through the landscape. As you can see here, if this had been covered in scrub, it's simply one operation to move that scrub out of the way. Any animals that were residing within that scrub, such as dormice, would need to be subject to a mitigation measure to move them out of the way. But once the line has been opened, life can come back in again.
A new piece of line will need to cross the A21 here. Of course, there was no Robertsbridge bypass in Colonel Stevens' day.
The only way to do this practically is with a level crossing. Trains don't go uphill well, so we can't carry the line over the road on a bridge. The marshy Valley 4 is too wet for a tunnel, and there isn't enough room between here and the roundabout to the north to bridge the road over the railway.
The A21 is a busy road. Isn't it going to cause delays?
When trains reach the crossing, they'll have moved away from the station and be up to cruising speed. And there'll only be short trains, no mile-long coal trains here, just leisure trips carrying passengers. So the crossing will be closed to the road traffic for under 2 minutes at a time. There'll only be 10 trains a day, none during rush hour and none in the winter, so even that minimal delay won't happen very often. The A21 is not overall a high-speed route. Just 2 miles to the north is a stretch with a 30-mile-an-hour speed limit, and twice a day on weekdays this is reduced to 20 miles an hour, with good reason. The level crossing will be the modern type, with full-width mechanically operated barriers under the direct control of a signaller at Robertsbridge, watching the crossing on CCTV. Thousands like this operate safely, year in and year out, and many carry high-speed intercity leviathans, quite unlike our sedate trains.
Robertsbridge clearly wasn't built for cars. The roads are narrow and the parking difficult. Another visitor attraction would cause gridlock, wouldn't it?
We're pitching Robertsbridge as a destination to be visited by rail. A good proportion of the London and South East demographic doesn't own a car, and Robertsbridge is an hour or so from London on the Hastings line. We'll attract visitors, but we want them to come by South Eastern trains or on our trains from Tenterden.
Where there's plenty of parking and it's free.
To encourage this, we'll be offering incentives to visitors who come to Robertsbridge without a car. For those who do drive to Robertsbridge, Network Rail's car park is on the doorstep, rarely full and often empty at weekends, when we expect most of our visitors.
Well, trains do create noise. The steam trains create, well, steam and smoke.
But hardly anyone lives close enough to our line to be badly affected by our steady, infrequent trains, although lots of Robertsbridge is quite close to the A21 and the frequent trains on the Hastings line. Anyway, ours will not be a busy railway. Most of the time what you'll hear and see here is nothing.
The Rother Valley is just that, a valley drained by the river and its tributaries. From time to time it floods. Would rebuilding the last few miles of railway increase the likelihood of flooding? And if it does, make it worse? The railway engaged Capita consultants and hydrologist Suzanne Calloway to explain.
Yes, I'm Suzanne Calloway. I'm a senior flood risk consultant at Capita. I've got about 14 years experience working in flood risk management. I've worked on a range of projects during my career, including looking at flood risk on the River Thames and the River Wey in Guildford. I'm also a chartered water and environmental manager, a chartered scientist and a chartered environmentalist.
So you've been working with the Rother Valley Railway. What have you been doing for them?
So yes, I'm part of the team at Capita that's been undertaking the flood risk assessment for Rother Valley Railway. We looked at all sources of flooding. The greatest risk in the area is from flooding from the river, so fluvial flooding. To understand the flood risk, we undertook some computer modelling. We used a model that the Environment Agency had developed previously for the Rother and then made some updates to it. The model includes cross-section surveys of the river. It includes elevation data, the fields that are next to the watercourse, includes the urban areas, roads, the defences that are around Robertsbridge and Northbridge Street. We then run different sized flood events through the model, and the model will predict which areas are flooding.
And the effect of climate change?
Yeah, so the climate change is incorporated into the hydrology.
And what is the final outcome on all this?
So there's two versions of the model: the existing condition and also with the proposed reinstated railway. Both versions of the model were run with the same set of design flood events. We tested a number of different design options in consultation with Rother Valley Railway, which included different configurations of rail elevation, culverts under the railway, looking at different ways that we could make sure that water was able to flow across the floodplain and minimise the impact that the railway would have on flood risk. In Robertsbridge and Northbridge Street, for all 5 of the flood events we simulated, there was no increase in flood risk to properties. There were areas in the wider floodplain where the flood levels increased and decreased, and generally the increase was only up to 5 centimetres. There were a few localised areas next to the railway where the flood levels increased more. I think it's important for residents to understand that the Rother is a river, there is a floodplain, and there will be flooding when big flood events come down the watercourse. The key thing is that the Rother Valley Railway has asked us to look at the impact and make sure that that doesn't increase flood risk to properties. It's also worth noting that the defences are designed to a certain standard of protection, which means that if a flood event bigger than their design standard happens, then there is potential for flooding to happen behind those defences, albeit in a more extreme flood event. And that was one of the key things that we looked at very closely with the Environment Agency to make sure that in very extreme events, the railway wasn't going to make flooding worse behind the defences. With the proposed railway version of the model, includes the railway on embankment through to approximately here. The levels then drop down to close to ground level to allow water to flood across during a flood event. There's then another section of slightly raised embankment which is existing, and then the levels drop down again closer to ground level again, so that the flow path across the floodplain is maintained. And then there's some existing embankment further downstream where the railway will be close to embankment levels that currently exist.
Now, if you lived in Robertsbridge, how confident would you be at living close to the river and the effect it'd have on you?
If I lived in Robertsbridge and Northbridge Street, I would of course be aware of the flood risk that is there at the moment, but having been involved in the FRA and being confident in the model results, I wouldn't be any more concerned with the railway being constructed.
We understand the community will have concerns. We hope to have shown you in this video that we're addressing these concerns seriously and in a sensitive way. Thank you for watching.